Meanwhile, somewhere it was seen Seo Joo-Heon who handed something to Seo-Ah. It seemed that Seo Joo-Heon wanted to make a contract by recruiting Seo-Ah into his team called Tomb Raider. Seo Joo-Heon also said if the contract was only valid as a reference because later when signing the contract it would be done using the Code of Hammurabi. And if Seo-Ah betrays her, then the relic will punish Seo-Ah. Seeing Seo-Ah's expression changing, Seo Joo-Heon also said if this was just for precaution and asked her not to think too much about this. Seo Joo-Heon believed Seo-Ah, and Seo Joo-Heon also didn't want to lie about anything with her, but Yoo Ji-ha suddenly woke up and protested about the contract that was made different from the one he received before. Seo Joo-Heon told Yoo Ji-ha to eat the food he had prepared before. Seo Joo-Heon also explained that the possibility of Yoo Ji-ha fainted because he used so many relics at the same time. Seo Joo-Heon also suggested Yoo Ji-ha to do some exercises so that he was stronger to fight, but Yoo Ji-ha only agreed and went to eat his breakfast. Seo-Ah whispered to Seo Joo-Heon about Yoo Ji-ha's memories, but it seemed that Yoo Ji-ha had not gotten his memories back. Seo-Ah talked about the talent that Yoo Ji-ha had in the past, which was very good, and with his memories back then Yoo Ji-ha would be as strong as before. But Seo Joo-Heon did not want to restore the memories of Yoo Ji-ha. Yoo Ji-ha, who used to be a genius painter, but he stumbled into trouble and made his life difficult and scammed people around him using his talent, and that's why he was called the King of Fraud. And his personality became worse and worse as time went by, and Seo Joo-Heon didn't want the old Yoo Ji-ha back. But of course now all that was left of Yoo Ji-ha was his stupidity and indiscipline. But at that time Seo Joo-Heon gave Yoo Ji-ha a chance to improve his self-esteem by letting him fight Richard on the news, and it seemed that Seo Joo-Heon would rethink whether or not Yoo Ji-ha would have his memory restored. Seo-Ah spoke up again and said that if they recovered Yoo Ji-ha's memories then there would be other problems that they didn't want. Seo Joo-Heon was happy when Seo-Ah remembered how bad Yoo Ji-ha was in the past. And seeing Yoo Ji-ha now, then it would be better for them not to recover Yoo Ji-ha's memories. After all the talk about Yoo Ji-ha, Seo-Ah agreed to the contract. Seo Joo-Heon was happy to hear that, and he also sent some people to Seo-Ah family so that Ch.100 could not do anything with her family. Meanwhile, with Yoo Ji-ha, who was surprised by the sudden appearance of the rope relic in front of him, the rope relic also demanded his promise for Yoo Ji-ha to play with him now, and immediately Yoo Ji-ha agreed to play. The rope relic quickly wrapped Yoo Ji-ha's head. It seemed that the rope relic knew that Yoo Ji-ha did not want to play with him, and that made him angry and attacked Yoo Ji-ha. Seo-Ah, who saw it, just looked at him with a difficult-to-interpret look, as well as Seo Joo-Heon. Meanwhile, elsewhere it was heard that Seo Kwon was angry with Richard because he had made Francisco useless by sending him to the hospital, even though Richard was sorry for making Francisco hurt. But Seo Kwon still did not accept what Richard did. Seo Kwon still continued to scold Richard because he had made the same mistake over and over again, and it made him very angry. Seo Kwon blamed Richard, who continuously made stupid decisions like that, and ended up with troublesome problems. The angry Seo Kwon also asked Richard to go back and fix his relic. After the call was closed, Richard could only harbor his resentment towards Seo Kwon because his pride was at stake now. Feeling that Seo Kwon could not help him, Richard called Jin Chae-won to help him solve this problem. Meanwhile, in a building located in Syria, two people were seen reporting the results of the excavation of the tomb that they managed to do to their superiors. The supervisor was seen praising them for doing a good job, but someone entered hurriedly and reported to Jin Chae-won about the problem that occurred, and he said that Seo Joo-Heon had managed to get out of the tomb, while Jin Chae-won, who heard the news, was not happy. The reporter then said that the tomb had been conquered along with the relic that had been taken. Ch.100 smiled angrily because the relic should have been in his custody, after which the voice of a relic was heard and admitted that they had used fraudulent means to get the relic. The relic also said that Seo Joo-Heon had a strange power, and he managed to get the relic that Ch.100 wanted. Hearing that, Ch.100 was surprised, and he asked the whereabouts of the relic now, but the relic said that the relic that Ch.100 wanted had been destroyed by Seo Joo-Heon. Hearing that the relic had been destroyed, Ch.100 was angry that he couldn't get the relic. Ch.100 also blamed the relic because the relic said that everything would be fine. It's just that Seo Joo-Heon was different from other ordinary people, and that's why the relic asked to stop Seo Joo-Heon. Ch.100 felt even more interested, and it managed to make the relic that was with him confused. Ch.100 was upset because the relic that had been making him live as he wanted, and then this happened to him. Ch.100 was very upset, and he was angry at Seo Joo-Heon, and Ch.100 intended to eat Seo Joo-Heon. But before that, his subordinate reported that Richard was calling Ch.100 right now. Ch.100 moved to answer the call and told his subordinate to keep reporting to him, even though the relic said that nothing could be done with Richard. But Ch.100 still wanted to talk to Richard, even though Richard had made it easier to keep an eye on the tomb. But Ch.100 did not intend to help Richard now, because he had to focus on Seo Joo-Heon and think about how to defeat Seo Joo-Heon. Meanwhile, still with Richard, he seemed upset that Ch.100 was nudging him to give him help, while Richard thought that if he could finish the fourth tomb later, then he was sure that people would soon forget about his plagiarism problem. But it seems that Ch.100 rejected the offer from Richard, and he asked Richard to solve his problem first before he talked about the tomb. After that, Ch.100 hung up the call and made Richard upset. Richard was upset because everything did not go according to his plan. And finally, Richard decided to use his own people to solve his own problems. Now, Seo Joo-Heon is in New York. After she returned from Syria, she has a lot of things to do, but now she prioritizes to answer some reports that come to her. News media such as newspapers and others conduct interviews to the two of them. However, Seo Joo-Heon did not hide anything in front of the media, and by using Edward's connections, various news appeared and Richard could not help but explain everything. Seo Joo-Heon intended to make controversial news for Richard, because Richard could not avoid the news. Richard has a relic named Vidic, a person who lived as a criminal to become a detective. Vidic Mirror Mask, the story inspired various story writers and various famous characters such as Lupin and Jean Valjean. And because it is famous for its story, who is very skilled in disguising himself as someone else. This relic has the power that the user can become anyone they want. But that is the weakness of Richard, who uses this relic, as he has to turn into Seo Joo-Heon first if he wants to paint his paintings. And for that reason, he never paints in front of people. After saying the necessary to the media, Seo Joo-Heon and Yoo Ji-ha walked away from the reporters who kept asking questions. Seo Joo-Heon felt that what she was doing now was not the usual thing to do, but Seo Joo-Heon still wanted to continue until the end. Meanwhile, Yoo Ji-ha became hesitant again about this plan. Seo Joo-Heon, who saw that, was a little upset, and she asked Yoo Ji-ha to check the news she had made. But when she opened her cell phone and wanted to see the news, at first everything seemed to be going well according to their plan, but there was an article that disappeared from the media. Yoo Ji-ha and Seo Joo-Heon were confused as to why something that had been uploaded to social media had just disappeared. Seo Joo-Heon also suspected that Richard had done something to silence them. Being upset and not wanting to be outdone, Seo Joo-Heon left the cafe to do some more interviews. Despite all the things she had done strangely, all the rumors that had been publicized disappeared from the media, And now Seo Joo-Heon was very sure that Richard had done something to make all the rumors disappear. This might have happened when Richard began to respond to Seo Joo-Heon's arguments with his own arguments, and the impact of that was unpredictable. Because Richard was a famous person. Slowly but surely his arguments captured the interest of the public who saw his arguments. Seo Joo-Heon could not allow this, and she had another plan, which was to use the relic Marie Antoinette's necklace. A relic that can be used to spread cruel rumors about a person. The story of a queen of France who suffered greatly because of the rumors circulating about her. And a fatal mistake was made by the queen where she bought a diamond necklace even though her country was in trouble at that time, and ended up with her being publicly executed. And since this relic had a sad story about the rumors, Seo Joo-Heon felt that his plan would work. But the problem was that he only had to see the target to use this relic, and lucky for them, they had found someone who was perfect for this problem. Seo Joo-Heon called Seo-Ah, and she gave her the order to use the relic when she saw Richard out in the open. Seo-Ah confidently agreed to Seo Joo-Heon's request, and since Richard was always doing interviews outside, Seo-Ah was easily able to carry out her mission. The next day she got a call from Seo-Ah if she had carried out her mission well, and Seo Joo-Heon was happy to hear that Seo-Ah did it right. Seo Joo-Heon opened her laptop again to look for rumors circulating about Richard. But there seemed to be no rumors circulating about the plagiarism that Richard did. And after they searched for so many articles, there was only one article that discussed the plagiarism problem. Seo Joo-Heon was a little depressed when her plan this time did not work according to what she wanted, and Seo Joo-Heon became sluggish seeing her plan failed. But an email notification appeared on her laptop. Seo Joo-Heon was surprised when she saw the contents of the email that said if there was someone who wanted to help Seo Joo-Heon in bringing down Richard with rumors, but the sender of the email asked for a reply later to Seo Joo-Heon. Seo Joo-Heon, who saw the email, became confused about the identity of the email sender. But after a few days of receiving the email, the news broadcast suddenly accused Richard of plagiarism, and this news quickly became a hot topic all over the world. Not only in America but other countries also discussed this topic. Although Yoo Ji-ha asked how Seo Joo-Heon did it, because it wasn't Seo Joo-Heon who did this, he didn't know anything. But Seo Joo-Heon was able to find out someone who could create this much chaos with the news media. King of propaganda, Wade Harmon. Someone who controls all the press and news media around the world. He peels off information that has even been hidden, and he easily organizes everything until the news appears perfectly around the world. Seo Joo-Heon knows that Wade is not a good person because he will not hesitate to reveal all the information of the people he wants and expose it to social media. Yoo Ji-ha didn't understand why such a person would help them solve their problems, but Seo Joo-Heon didn't feel that Wade was really helping her. That person was just happy to attack Richard. But Seo Joo-Heon didn't want to miss this opportunity. The slow-moving battle began to change with the arrival of the king of propaganda who caused chaos around the world, who defamed Richard with accusations of plagiarism, and it was clear that the king of propaganda was planning something, but they preferred to take advantage of this. After that, Seo Joo-Heon returned to public speaking and requested that Richard paint in public. And the number of people who agreed with this increased dramatically, and Seo Joo-Heon began to add witnesses to her side. She began to call all the friends who had been in the same class as Yoo Ji-ha, even though Yoo Ji-ha seemed to protest it. Seo Joo-Heon did it anyway, and she began to question the truth that happened when they were in the same class. Seo Joo-Heon persuaded them to tell the truth and bring down the good name of Richard. Yoo Ji-ha protested to Seo Joo-Heon, who he thought had threatened the theme of his classmates, but Seo Joo-Heon rejected that sentence and said that he was only persuading them to tell the truth, because more witnesses would be very useful for them. Yoo Ji-ha doubted if his friends wanted to help him because they used to look away when Yoo Ji-ha was in trouble with Richard. But Seo Joo-Heon calmed Yoo Ji-ha because this time the situation was different. They would definitely help Yoo Ji-ha now. And with that, the news about Richard continued to grow, and Seo Joo-Heon questioned one by one Yoo Ji-ha's friends who were all over the world to tell the truth. Well, although there was one friend who lived in New York and was visited directly by Seo Joo-Heon. After registering a very large number of witnesses, Seo Joo-Heon was satisfied with the results. Yoo Ji-ha also looked very happy because he saw that his friend now turned to help him. But Seo Joo-Heon did not want this to end quickly because he still had other plans in his head to make things interesting. Because Seo Joo-Heon would soon send a crushing blow to Richard. Meanwhile, with Richard, who was very upset and angry because of the many media covering him with bad issues, Richard also ordered his subordinates to silence all the media who blasphemed him. And when he opened the door of his house, Richard was surprised when he saw many reporters outside his house who were preparing to cover him. The crowd of reporters reviled Richard with various questions and made him confused to respond. But among the crowd of reporters was seen Seo Joo-Heon, who came and talked to Richard. Seo Joo-Heon also asked Richard to admit his mistake because the whole world knew what he did. Seo Joo-Heon also gave a challenge to Richard to prove it if he would not admit his guilt. Richard was upset, but he had no choice but to prove it. But Richard made an offer where if he was proven innocent, then Seo Joo-Heon had to give up all the relics. Seo Joo-Heon didn't want to accept the offer if she would only lose from the offer. But Richard said that he was risking the pride he had built up by making this offer, so he asked Seo Joo-Heon to give up all the relics if he won. Richard smiled wryly at Seo Joo-Heon. Seo Joo-Heon, who heard that, just smiled because he saw Richard, who was very confident. And Seo Joo-Heon also without hesitation answered the challenge from Richard. Yoo Ji-ha was very surprised and panicked when he heard Seo Joo-Heon agreed to his offer. Yoo Ji-ha could not protest because his mouth was closed by Seo Joo-Heon. And with this, Seo Joo-Heon decided that the time for them to fight was now. The words suddenly made the reporters who were present there happy and looking forward to what would happen next. Richard agreed to Seo Joo-Heon to do it now. After the heated debate, a room was set up for the two of them to fight. As rumors spread, a lot of people came to see them fight each other. There were even some people from the art class came to see. Meanwhile, Yoo Ji-ha looked panicked because he had to fight Richard, who was his own mentor. Even though Seo Joo-Heon said that Richard could not use his relic, but still Richard was a good painter. And because of his advantages, Richard might be able to copy Yoo Ji-ha's paintings well. Yoo Ji-ha was even more doubtful when Richard boldly challenged Seo Joo-Heon to hand over all his relics. But Seo Joo-Heon just smiled. Actually, Seo Joo-Heon also didn't want to continue this competition because of the offer determined by Richard. But Seo Joo-Heon still accepted it because she was sure that now Richard was in a condition not much different from Yoo Ji-ha. And it calmed Yoo Ji-ha a little even though she still felt doubtful. After everyone was present, a host was in the center and he explained that Yoo Ji-ha and Richard would decide the competition by repainting the painting that was in front of them right now. There was Seo Joo-Heon, who was still encouraging Yoo Ji-ha, and Richard, who were looking at the two of them. Richard felt confident because he could still paint even without using relics. And with that, he poured his first paint onto the blank canvas to repaint the painting in front of him. He was very confident now. He was sure he would win just by repainting like he used to do. After that, Richard seemed to focus on his work even though he was a little hesitant because his hands did not move smoothly. Seo Joo-Heon, who was watching the two of them painting himself, smiled as everyone was watching the two painters focusing on doing their respective work. The stakes were very easy. If Richard could paint well, then he won, but if he couldn't do it, then Richard would certainly lose. And shortly after that, Richard's face became worried now because he couldn't paint properly on his canvas. Richard then doubted himself who couldn't paint well. Some people there also started talking about Richard and asked him to paint seriously. Seo Joo-Heon, who saw that, smiled happily. He knew now that Richard was seriously working on his paintings, just that everything was not going according to what he wanted. And Seo Joo-Heon also assumed that Richard was now receiving risk from the Vedic relic that he used repeatedly. Everyone there was surprised to hear the words of Seo Joo-Heon, and they started asking questions. Seo Joo-Heon also leaked the relic that Richard used to plagiarize Yoo Ji's paintings, but unfortunately he did not think about the risk that arose after he used the relic. Seo Joo-Heon also explained again with Richard, who used the relic to imitate others, he slowly lost himself. Because Richard continuously copied Yoo Ji's paintings, he slowly lost his identity and lost his own painting style. Richard was shocked by that fact, but Seo Joo-Heon assured him that the relic worked that way. And after divulging everything, Seo Joo-Heon again cornered Richard as a plagiarist. What will happen to Richard?